ever-faithful companion, Dark Magician!
Welcome along, fellow Dark Magician enthusiasts, to another video. Today's video is going to be a more in-depth analysis of the 3 decks I used in the KC Cup, my thoughts around them, because I did say I was going to make this video, and I would also like to give my opinions on what could be changed and how I reckon the deck should be played, like, you know, going forward, something like that, you know. We'll get right into it by looking at first the Hieratic Seal deck that I tried in the KC Cup but didn't get too much success with. And this is the Hieratic Seal deck that I used. Now, I will say I did make some blunders with the deck building. I will freely admit that, because I didn't really design the deck in a way that's supposed to support Hieratic Seal and strengthen its power by utilizing every other card on our field. Because if Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres has its effects negated, then you can't really bounce a face-up card on the field. You can still special summon Grand Tusk Dragon from the deck when it's tributed. If you don't have any other cards to back up the Hieratic Seal face-up bounce, then you're really not going to get a lot of value out of the effect, and it can make your plays and interruptions feel very narrow, which is where staples come into play and different parts of the deck that needs to be, like, you know, structured differently. Because you do need a supporting cast of staples like Book of Eclipse, Forbidden Droplet, Magician Navigation, or even monster staples like Effect Veiler, Droll Lockbird, DD Crow, even cards like Ghost Bell and Ghost Mourner. If you have these other cards that are backing up Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres, it makes Hieratic Seal a lot more threatening than just Hieratic Seal bounce, Grand Tusk pop, and then Fusion Summon Dragoon for a negate. And this is where other cards like Magician's Combination also come into play as well. You really need multiple cards in play ready to go so you can disrupt your opponent even further and just push them back a lot, so that when it comes to your turn, you can simply OTK them and just go for game like that. I did include Magician of Chaos in this deck because I do love the going second tech of making Master of Chaos unaffected. But with the meta that we're playing in right now, like, it's still good, don't get me wrong, I still love it, it's still very, very good. But if your opponent knows what you're going for, they have a lot of negates and stuff, then it's a lot harder to try and pull off this combo. So realistically, Magician of Chaos could be replaced by Illusion of Chaos, or any other Dark Spellcaster, or just more generic spells, or traps, or monsters. So this deck can be improved in a lot of ways to make Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres a lot stronger. In fact, if you're feeling like Apprentice Illusion Magician and Magician Navigation is clogging up your deck space and it's making it really hard to get into the combos to make Hieratic Seal, you can make Hieratic Seal with just Magician Souls, Rod, and Magician Salvation. Since Master of the Dark and Chaos sends DMG to the graveyard, you can use Magician Souls and Salvation together. You summon DMG from the graveyard, then Salvation summons the opposite name from the graveyard, normal summon Rod, grab whatever cards you need, and then you just link summon Protector Whelp, Imduck, and then straight into Hieratic Seal. So that way you don't have to summon too many monsters and you can get this combo going off really, really well. So you might be wondering, how would I play this in future? With Hieratic Seal, you could easily turn it into something like this. Yes, it is more expensive now that you're using staples like Forbidden Droplet and Ghost Mourner, but this really helps build up Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Sphere's strength a lot. Plus, if you have Eternal Soul on your field, you got Combination as well, and then you summon DM or DMG, and once you use Combination's effect, you can always use Rod in the graveyard, tribute the monster that's on your field, add it to your hand, and when you summon Grand Tusk Dragon, after tributing Hieratic Seal, bouncing an opponent's face-up card, and you make Dragoon with Secrets and DM, you'll have a discard ready to go for your Dragoon negate. So it makes it's a really cohesive strategy that all blends together. And plus, if there are cards you're not going to be using anymore for Forbidden Droplet, you can send them to the graveyard. Combined with Combination, you can get the destruction effect that Combination has when it's sent to the graveyard after being face up. So it really all blends together, and it's a lot stronger than the initial build that I had, where it was just mainly focused on turboing out Hieratic Seal and relying on just that and Grand Tusk Dragon. Now, I know the win-loss rate for the Hieratic Seal deck was quite low, and I did drop it quite early. With the second stage of the KC Cup, I was really focused on getting top 1000. If I played the deck more, I could have gotten more wins out of it, but not entirely sure. We'll have to see what happens in future. I could try it again, like, you know, try and get Cog of it and prove, like, you know, it's still good. It's still a viable strat. But we'll just have to see how things pan out. Moving on to the second best deck, which is the Dragoon Magicians. Now, this was just me playing the normal strat that I use, which is IP Masquerader, going into Nightmare Unicorn or Goddess, and then using our DM cards to set up either IP Masquerader and Circle combination Eternal Soul, or even trying to get Dragoon out as well, maybe a Link Monster, or maybe just a bunch of back row set and pass. Now, this deck did get more wins than the Hieratic Seal version, but it's only as good as the DM cards themselves. With my philosophy of using no spell staples, no trap staples, no main deck monster staples like hand traps, the deck is only as good as it is built to be. Like, the deck is only as good as the DM cards, and it honestly could be backed up by some staples more. Without D and the Dragon Knight's protection, the back row is very vulnerable, so if you have Circle, Culmination, Eternal Soul, you have to depend on those three interruptions a lot. And you have to depend on IP Masquerader's interruption and Dragoon's negate as well when you're going first. It's still good, don't get me wrong, it's still a good strategy, but there can come a time where sometimes, you know, Eternal Soul, Circle, Culmination isn't enough and it needs to be backed up by more. So once again, this is where the staples do come into play, like Ghost Mourner, Ghost Spell, Forbidden Droplet, Effect Veiler, Droll and Lockbird, DD Crow. A deck by itself can only output as much power as Konami have designed it to output, and realistically, you know, we're entering a format where staples are slowly becoming more mandatory and becoming necessary for every deck. Not just the best decks, but for every deck to play well. Forbidden Droplet is a really powerful card. If you have a bunch of cards in your hand and you want to keep IP Masquerader on the field, or if your opponent has ended up negating your IP Masquerader and you got no more use for it, you can use Droplet to get rid of it and stop your opponent in the meantime. So it provides not only advantage for the player going second, but for the player going first as well. And like I talked about with the Hieratic Seal version, like, you know, Culmination, you send it while it was face up on the field to the graveyard and you get its destruction effect. You send any monster that's been negated and you'll be able to negate your opponent's cards, and at the same time you're preventing yourself from becoming wide open to high attack damage and, like, you know, your opponent having lethal for game. So you might be wondering, how would I change this deck? This is just an example with a few adjustments so you can still keep the same level of consistency. If you don't want the extra draw with Mahad, you'd rather not risk the brick, you can always replace it with another Effect Veiler, or with any other hand trap like Ghost Spell. You could even put in Ghost Mourner, there it is there. So, like, you can make a bunch of adjustments depending on what the meta's like and how well your deck can draw into these kind of cards and, like, you know, utilize them for your advantage. Like, in all honesty, with a bunch of adjustments, you know, this deck can be really, really good. I think for me personally, this is going to be a time where I'm starting to gravitate more towards the staples and hand traps, because really, even if I know my own deck really, really well and I use it as efficiently as possible, there's no mistaking the fact that staples are just really powerful and they increase your deck's power a lot more. And so if you can use them, you really should use them as much as possible. Which is probably what I'm going to be doing from here on out, you know? Just how it's got to be, you know? Doesn't mean the deck's bad? No, doesn't mean the deck's bad at all. But staples can just complement the power of your deck a lot more than what it currently has, you know? And there may be times where you won't need the unaffected Master of Chaos combo, where you can just use Droplet or even use Ghost Spell to stop plays your opponents might have while you're doing your own combos as well. So it's a lot to think about. And moving on to the final version, the final deck that got me a lot of wins and the one that I really focused on for getting the top 1000 was the Dragon Knights. I do have to say, after playing all three decks and, like, you know, trying my best with them, the IVNI Dragon, unmistakably, is pretty strong. Yes, Master of the Dark and Chaos is a lot more consistent, plus it gets DMG into the graveyard, making Soul Servant, Dark Magic Expanded, Salvation, so on, live instantly. The fact that the Eye of the United Dragon puts monsters onto the field makes certain plays a lot stronger instantly. Like being able to put DMG onto the field directly. Like if you've normal summon Rod, you can just flip DMG face up and you instantly have a Link 2 plus Dragon Knight on the field already. Compared to where you would have to maybe use Magician Soul, send DMG to the graveyard, and then special summon DMG from the graveyard to get a Link 2. The skill makes it so much easier to combine both fusions and links effortlessly without having to expend multiple resources trying to get everything onto the field, get all your plays set up, and like, you know, still have a full back row and a plentiful hand ready to go. And once again, this deck did utilize no staples or hand traps in the main deck whatsoever and relied purely on the deck's own strength. Which there were at times where, like, you know, Dark Magic Attack just wouldn't resolve at times, or like, you know, the opponent would just get rid of DM instantly, or the opponent would have multiple monsters like Masquerade, Mirror Jade, and so on, where they would be such big threats you'd have to try and play through them so hard, but without staples to back you up, there was no real way to, like, you know, stop those cards, and you had to rely purely on your deck's power. Which for me, I know the deck very, very well, but it can only do so much once again, which, you know, staples and hand traps are kind of necessary at some point. Like if you have a Masquerade the Blazing Dragon that's on the field and you're constantly paying life points, sometimes you do need to just flip it face down with Book of Eclipse or negate it with Forbidden Droplet. There may be times where your opponent has their own IP Masquerade and you don't want to run the risk of them making their own Nightmare Unicorn or their own Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. There is that risk, and sometimes, you know, a staple is necessary to just try and stop this, so that way you've got a low attack monster on your opponent's field that you can easily beat into and attack for game. Sometimes that stuff is pretty well necessary. And once again, this isn't to say that the deck is bad, because I did get 68 wins with this deck. No staples, no hand traps in the main deck whatsoever. The only real staples that I was relying on was IP Masquerena, Unicorn, Underworld Goddess, and Typhon Sky Crisis, which is still only made possible depending on your own deck's power and its ability to get multiple monsters onto the field and so on. Overall, can this deck made to be a lot stronger? I personally think it can. Which is why for my next King of Games, I'm going to be running a deck kind of like this. I've got, like, you know, multiple Ghost Spells, multiple Vec Veilers, multiple Forbidden Droplets. But I've still got 9 ways to get into my skill and get it going. And if I draw the correct hand where I'm able, like, you know, have a draw 3 because I played him or my Hardened Soul Servant, or I'm able to get, you know, like, you know, Circle, Eternal Soul, Combination, Dragoon, IP Masquerena, all into the field, it's still possible with this deck. It might not be as consistent as a 25 card version, but if I'm going second and my opponent's doing multiple plays and I got hand traps that I can use to stop my opponent, it can make my turn a lot easier so I can OTK them. And you might be surprised to think there's only 2 Dark Magicians in your deck, why not 3? I know I have always said you should be running 3 no matter what so you don't lose access to DM. There are times though where 2 is acceptable, but you have to be okay with the risk of losing access to DM. Because there are lots of cards that do have ways of getting rid of your DMs and killing your entire deck. That's why I've always recommended running 3. However, if there are times where you're drawing too many DMs and you want to see more cards like Tomai's United Dragon, Illusion of Chaos, Preparation of Rites, Forbidden Droplet, Fake Valor, and so on, sometimes using just 2 is okay. And if you really want to, you can run 1 copy of Dark Magician, and that can work to some degree. But the moment you lose DM, you lose the game because your entire deck dies. It is a bit more acceptable running just 2 with this skill because we have Dark Magician Dragon Knight, which becomes a 3rd Dark Magician once we summon it. But you still need to keep in mind that we do need DM to summon it in the first place, and so if you have no access to DM whatsoever, you can't summon this monster, and then you lose DM completely, and then your deck just dies completely. There is a lot to consider with this deck, and really, your deck is only as good as your deck building choices, which in my case that happened. It was only as good as my deck building choices, with no monster hand traps, no spell staples, not even trap staples. I was struggling in some matches a lot, but I do have a feeling that with these hand traps and staples, my deck will be a lot stronger and a lot more resilient to specific end fields that my opponents are trying to set up and, like, you know, trying to completely shut me down with. Now, with the deck as a whole, I honestly think that the Eye of the United Dragon is going to be the more prominent skill eventually once people start picking up on it, start picking up multiple copies of Timaeus, Illusion of Chaos, and Preparation Rites. Because yes, it is an expensive skill to run since you need to see Timaeus as much as possible. But Master of the Dark and Chaos is still a viable option. It's still very, very good. People have gotten tops of it. People have proven that it can be very, very good, very, very powerful. It just really depends on how you build your deck and, like, you know, like how you structure your plays. Because a Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres is going to play a lot differently to IP Masquerena and vice versa. I do want to ask the question, what do you guys think about the deck? What do you guys think you'll be doing going forward and so on? Because this video, this was unscripted because I wanted you all to see, like, you know, the inner workings of my mind, what I was thinking regarding specific decks, what I've realized, like, you know, mistakes I've made, and flaws in trying to rely only on deck power and not staples and hand traps. Like, let me know, are you guys gonna, like, you know, gravitate towards using more staples like Droplet or Effect Veiler, or even Ghost Spell if you can afford it, or, like, you know, Ghost Mourner, Droll and Lockbird if you can afford it, and so on? Are you guys gonna try and gravitate towards those more, or are you gonna try and rely just on the deck strength? Because I do believe, if I haven't mentioned this already, if other decks are using staples to, like, you know, power up their own decks and make their own plays more viable and, like, you know, less prone to interruptions, then I don't see why we can't start using it and why I shouldn't be using them, you know? Like, if other decks use them, then why can't I, you know? Sometimes just gotta be like that. Yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you guys think? What you guys will be doing? What you be playing? What skill and so on? Because I would love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to see what you guys have in mind. And yeah, before I finish the video, you may be looking at this and wondering, what the hell is this? This is a spreadsheet that was made by Boofsquat. Massive shout out to Boofsquat, who, in their own time, took the time to look at all my replays and stuff and just compile a bunch of data about, like, you know, what cards were, what monsters were summoned, what cards were used, how the KC Cup climb in the first stage performed, the win rates against specific decks. If it loads, there we go. Like, you know, how many games I won and lost against specific decks and so on, as well as, like, you know, my King of Games as well. Like, you know, the different decks that I played against, what cards were played and so on. Which, this data is really, really cool to see. Like, you know, massive W to Boofsquat. You guys should check this out. I'll put a link to these spreadsheets in the description below if you guys want to have a look, if you're curious. Because this data is really, really interesting to look at. Like, you know, from King Games from last month, spending the most matches in Legend 2, nuts, and seeing that Dragoon was summoned 43 times in the King Games climb, nuts. And the fact that Forbidden Droplet was the most seen staple from the opponents, crazy stuff. I think this data is very, very useful, and hey, it might even, like, you know, educate you guys on, like, you know, what decks are playing, what staples they're using, and what staples you maybe should be using against them, you know? It'd be worth it. With that all being said, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you all next time.